Almost everyone knows what happened to Marie Antoinette and her husband Louis XVI, how their lives were tragically and brutally ended during the French Revolution of 1789. The story of their daughter, Marie-Thérèse, has not been widely written about, but it deserves to be known because she proved to be an interesting and inspiring character. Her tragic life story is about survival and sheer determination to fight till the very end. Born to her famous parents, the monarchs of France, on the 19th of December 1778, at the Palace of Versailles, Marie-Thérèse Charlotte of France was a long-awaited child of the royal couple 7 years into their marriage. Her mother, Marie Antoinette, nicknamed her newborn daughter Mousseline, but she was also known as Madame Royale. Marie-Thérèse was brought up by two loving parents who adored her, spoiled by Louis XVI and taught by Marie Antoinette to be kind to those less fortunate than her. Madame Royale was growing up to become a young, serious child. By the time she was 8 years old, Marie-Thérèse had already 2 more brothers and a sister. Louis-Joseph, born in 1781, who died of tuberculosis when he was 7 years old, just before the Revolution started, Louis-Charles, born in 1785, and Sophie Helen, born in 1786, who died in her infancy. Inexperienced to deal with the social unrest and problems that France was facing in 1789, the 35-year-old King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette, who was 34 years old, were just months away from attempting to flee France with their family in June 1791. Their attempt failed, and they were brought back to Paris heavily guarded and unable to escape. The funeral march of the monarchy was being witnessed by its own representatives. The following summer, Marie-Thérèse was imprisoned together with her parents, her 4-year-old brother, and her father's sister Elizabeth in the Temple in Paris. A month after their incarceration, when the institution of the monarchy was abolished in September 1792, the royal family's future was looking bleak. Worried for his children's safety, the king was trying to keep their spirit up by teaching his children geography and various stories. Uncertainty was obviously unbearable. The prison guards would watch them closely, monitoring their discussions and every gesture. They would only have 3 more months living together. On a cold day in January 1793, the king was taken away from his family and brutally killed by guillotine. France would change profoundly as a country, and so would Marie's life. When Marie Antoinette learned about her husband's death, she knelt down before her son Louis-Charles. The king was dead. Long live the king. He had become Louis XVII. After her father's death, Marie's life became almost unbearable. One by one, the remaining members of her family would be taken away and they would vanish from Marie's life. Soon after the king died, Marie Antoinette was also removed from the prison cell the royal family were sharing and was also executed in October 1793. Marie-Thérèse would learn about her mother's death only in 1795. One can only imagine how difficult life in prison must have been for Marie and her brother. Yet Louis-Charles would not be spared either. Any viable and traceable link to the monarchy had to be severed. Louis-Charles was also separated from his family and detained in an insalubrious cell. He was neglected by the guards, and the 10-year-old boy king died alone and forgotten on the 8th of June 1795. After Marie Antoinette died, Marie-Thérèse had only her Aunt Elizabeth, who was her father's sister, to rely on, but that was short-lived too, because in May 1794, Elizabeth was separated from Marie and guillotined, just because she was the late king's sister. For the next 1.5 years, Madame Royale would spend her time alone in her prison room, relying only on her inner strength and her religious beliefs as a devout Catholic for her own survival. Towards the end of her time in confinement, and with all her family dead, the decision was made to allow Marie-Thérèse some small liberties, a visitor, books, ink and paper, and short walks in the prison gardens. A month before the end of 1795, the new French government negotiated the exchange of French prisoners held captive in Austria, and Marie was released from prison and allowed to travel to her mother's country of origin. A day after her release, Madame Royale turned 17. During the 3.5 years that Marie-Thérèse spent in prison, her life changed forever. Her parents and her brother would only be living in her thoughts, but her inner desire to take revenge would never die. The memory of her family would guide Marie-Thérèse for the rest of her life. Once in Austria, Marie would spend 3 years at the court of Franz II, the Holy Roman Emperor, although she wanted to join her uncle, Louis XVIII, the brother of her father, in Italy. Always wearing black mourning dresses, Marie was a rather beautiful young princess, although she was always looking sad. The emperor tried to persuade her to marry into Austrian royalty, but she resisted. France and the idea of French monarchy would always be in the back of her mind. She was harboring the desire that one day her life would take her back to France, and she would help restore the monarchy, thus vindicated the family's memory. In the spring of 1799, Marie traveled to Russia, where her uncle was living in exile, and she accepted the marriage proposal to marry her cousin, Louis-Antoine, Duc d'Angoulême. He was the son of Count of Artois, who was the younger brother of Marie's father, Louis XVI. Madame Royale's path back to the French throne was beginning to take shape. From that point forward, Marie-Thérèse and her husband lived in exile with the French court, supporting their uncle king and traveling to Prussia, Russia and England and back to Russia according to different political alliances. After Napoleon's Russian campaign, his political future was looking unstable. Marie-Thérèse was beginning to realize how close she was to achieving her dream when, in March 1814, the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy was proclaimed and Louis XVIII became King of France. In April 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate, and Marie-Thérèse and her uncle king returned to France and regained the royal throne. When Marie-Thérèse arrived in France, after 2 decades, she was relieved and extremely happy to return to her homeland. Her fight had not been in vain, and the memory of her parents was vindicated. Scheming to return to power, Napoleon escaped from Elba in March 1815 and returned to Paris to regain his throne. Once again, the monarchy was overthrown and the royal court fled to England. Marie resisted and she remained in Bordeaux, but she gave in when Napoleon's cause seemed to gain support. His return was short-lived, and after his lost battle at Waterloo, he was forced to abdicate for the last time and exiled by the British on the remote island of St. Helena. Marie's prayers seemed to be listened to, and the Bourbons were able to return to France. For the next 15 years, Madame Royale was able to reconnect with her country and to live a quiet life, although not for long. When Louis XVIII died in September 1824, Marie's father-in-law became Charles X, who would rule for 6 years before the monarchy was again facing problems in 1830. Charles was forced to abdicate that summer, and the House of Bourbons would be forced to go into exile again. Madame Royale left France for the last time and went to live in Scotland for 3 years. From there, the royal family moved to a grand residence in Prague and later to an Italian villa where the king died in 1836. When her husband, the Duke of Angoulême, died in 1844, Marie moved to a castle near Vienna, where she lived quietly until her death on the 19th of October, 1851. During her life of intense suffering, Marie-Thérèse never forgot her parents, and she prayed constantly for their souls. She lived a life dominated by uncertainty and changes of fortune, but she was fearless, proving she was able to withstand whatever life threw at her, and the very fact that she survived is a testament to the courage of the last truly royal princess of France. Towards the end of the 18th century, France was entering its first phase in the country's history, aiming to end the old regime of the absolutist monarchy. The 1789 revolution sparked the beginning of the end for the monarchy that had existed for centuries. 3 kings who witnessed extraordinary events during that period belonged to the House of Bourbons, who had ruled France for 200 years and were all the sons of Louis Ferdinand, Dauphin of France. His sons became kings of France during one of the most significant and eventful periods in the country's history. Louis Ferdinand, Dauphin of France, was himself the son of Louis XV, who had ruled over France for 59 years. He was born on the 4th of September 1729 at the Palace of Versailles to the illustrious French king and his wife Marie Leczinska, a Polish princess. Louis the Dauphin was twice married, firstly in 1745 to the 19-year-old Infanta Maria Theresa Rafaela of Spain, daughter of King Philip V, who died shortly after the birth of their daughter in 1746. Although profoundly affected by his loss, the 16-year-old Louis had to marry again. His father arranged a new marriage for Louis the following year to Maria Josepha of Saxony, the 15-year-old younger daughter of Frederick Augustus II, Prince Elector of Saxony and King of Poland. Fortunately for Louis, the new match proved to be a happy one. The couple were devoted and faithful to each other and had many children together. 5 of them lived into adulthood, and his 3 sons became kings of France. As a character, Louis was totally different from that of his father, who was a serious philanderer renowned for his legendary mistresses. He was a cultured and educated man with strong ethics and religious beliefs as a devout Catholic. Unfortunately, Louis the Dauphin died young. He was only 36 years old, and he didn't have the chance to be king. But his 3 sons ruled France during a period of huge transformation of the nation, witnessing the downfall of the monarchy and its restoration at the end of the 18th century and at the beginning of the 19th century. One can only speculate that if he hadn't died so young, he would have inherited the throne, and possibly he would have managed to rule differently and perhaps could have avoided the fall of the monarchy. His son, Louis Auguste, became Louis XVI in 1774 at the age of 19. The young king had a similar young wife named Marie Antoinette. Her father was the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I, and her mother, the Empress Maria Theresa. They had 4 children together: Marie Therese, born in 1778, Louis Joseph, born in 1781, who died of tuberculosis when he was 7 years old, just before the Revolution started, Louis Charles, born in 1785, and Sophie Helen, born in 1786, who died in her infancy. Marie Therese was the couple's only child to survive the dramatic events sparked by the French Revolution of 1789. Inexperienced to deal with the financial and social problems that France was facing as a result of the previous despotic rule of his grandfather Louis XV, Louis XVI ruled over France for 18 years. He sided with the colonists in the American War of Independence, supporting their cause, but at a huge financial cost for France. That led to the king's attempt to impose radical fiscal, economic and administrative reforms that faced opposition and eventually sparked the revolution. His inability to react decisively to the social and political unrest, due partly to personal tragedies, such was the death of his son just before the revolution started, made Louis XVI and his unpopular wife, Marie Antoinette, decide to flee Paris in June 1791. Their attempt failed, and they were brought back to Paris, heavily guarded and unable to escape. The following year, the royal family was imprisoned, and a month after their incarceration, when the institution of the monarchy was abolished, in September 1792, the royal family's future was looking bleak. The king was brutally executed, and his wife Marie Antoinette and their son had the same tragic end. The king's brother, the Count of Provence, and his wife fled to the Austrian Netherlands at the same time as the royal family, but unlike the king, they were actually able to escape France. Louis Stanislas Xavier was another son of Louis, Dauphin of France. He was born on the 17th of November 1755 in the Palace of Versailles and was known as Count of Provence. He was 1 year younger than his brother Louis Auguste, Duc de Berry. After the execution of his brother in January 1793, the Count of Provence declared himself regent for Louis Charles, Louis XVII, who was still detained after his parents were guillotined. When the young king died in June 1795, the Count of Provence proclaimed himself Louis XVIII whilst he was still living in exile. On the 14th of May 1771, Louis Stanislas married Princess Maria Giuseppina of Savoy at the Palace of Versailles. The Count was not very enthusiastic about the match, and the couple's marriage was an unhappy one, and it didn't produce any children. 3 years after his niece, Marie Therese, was released from captivity, she was able to join her uncle in Russia. He arranged for her to marry his nephew, Louis Antoine, Duc d'Angoulême. He was the son of Count of Artois, who was the younger brother of Marie's father, Louis XVI. Louis Stanislas spent 23 years in exile, living in Prussia, Russia, and England, according to different political alliances, and setting up his court wherever he happened to stay. Meanwhile, France became an empire under the rule of Napoleon, and it seemed that Louis Stanislas would never achieve his long-desired French crown. Yet, after Napoleon's Russian campaign, his political future was looking unstable. In March 1814, the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy was proclaimed, and Louis XVIII became King of France. In April 1814, Napoleon was forced to abdicate, and the king and his court returned to France and regained the royal throne. Unfortunately for Louis XVIII, his new position was short-lived. Scheming to return to power, Napoleon escaped from Elba in March 1815 and returned to Paris to regain his throne. Once again the monarchy was overthrown and the king fled to Holland. Napoleon's return was also short-lived, and after his lost battle at Waterloo, he was forced to abdicate for the last time and was exiled by the British on the remote island of St. Helena. King Louis XVIII returned to France on the 26th of June, 1815, and the monarchy was restored once again, this time as a parliamentary monarchy. The king pursued a reconciliation policy and ruled until his death on the 16th of September 1824. He was succeeded by his youngest brother, the Count of Artois, as Charles X. Charles Philippe of France was the youngest son of the Dauphin Louis and was born in 1757 at the Palace of Versailles. He was also known as Count of Artois. In November 1773, Charles married Marie Thérèse of Savoy, and the couple had two sons. In 1775, Louis Antoine, who was created Duke of Angoulême, and in 1778, Charles Ferdinand, who was given the title of Duke of Berry. Charles Philippe was a rather handsome man who had a scandalous lifestyle, ignoring his wife and engaging in affairs with other women. He also spent a lot of money on building his own chateau, leaving his brother, King Louis XVI, to pay his debts. He was an ultra-royalist, and although he acknowledged that around 1789 France was facing financial difficulties, he did not support removing the privileges of the monarchy. In July, Charles left France at the advice of his brother when things started to deteriorate and the revolutionary sentiment became dominant. He spent his time in exile in various countries such as Italy, Germany, and eventually Great Britain, where he tried to support the cause for the dying French monarchy. After the revolution claimed the king's head, Louis XVIII arranged for Marie Thérèse to marry his nephew, Louis Antoine, Duc d'Angoulême. When Napoleon was forced to abdicate, in 1814, Charles was the first member of the royal family to arrive in France before Louis XVIII joined him in May to claim the throne. When Louis XVIII died in 1824, Charles Philippe became Charles X. He strongly opposed a conciliatory type of rule, and he wanted to reenact the previous monarchy, proving unpopular as a king. His absolutist monarchy traits led eventually to a new revolution in 1830, after 6 years of reigning in France. He was forced to abdicate and go into exile once more. History was repeating itself. France had acquired a taste of liberty, and the king failed to see that. He lived in Great Britain with his court, moving later to Prague, and from there to Gorizia in Italy, where he died in November 1836. Events that had started 40 years earlier, with the Revolution of 1789, ended the dominance of a famous family of the House of Bourbons, weakening eventually the support for monarchy in France.